Faruzan is a legendary 4-star revered by all, so today I thought it'd be fun to evaluate her current meta position. My name is Juice and let's get into it. Naturally, we've got to kick things off with her kit feel. We'll be evaluating her in 3 teams today: Xiao teams, Scaramouche teams, and Hazo teams. Starting off with Xiao teams, it's genuinely wild what Faruzan's able to do for him. All of her buffs are what turns Xiao into a truly meta main DPS. Faruzan's buffs are so strong for him that she single-handedly acts as the main reason as to why this dude's a high A-tier DPS. Even if you don't have her C6, which admittedly is a big help, she is still a huge increase to Xiao teams as opposed to not using her at all. If you stick her on a Fav bow, then she's a pretty nice battery for the guy as well. Yeah, you might be thinking, Juice, Faruzan's an absolute ER solar panel. While that's true in general, in Xiao teams, not so much. The dude has multiple skill charges for starters. She generates some of her own particles, and if you're using Xianyun, then that's even more Anemo particles you're getting. In the guy's best in slot team, Anemo energy particles are abundant enough to scare somebody from Vijianzhou. To me, this is the team where Faruzan easily feels the best. However, funnily enough, she was initially designed as a Scaramouche support, and oh boy, does it show. His damage becomes infinitely higher when you stick this woman on his team. It's pretty much the same idea as Xiao. Genshin Miku makes the funny green numbers even more hilarious. She's on the guy's banner for a reason. They are absolutely glued to each other if you want to play Scar's most high damaging teams. Whichever one you prefer pretty much just depends on the Anemo DPS that you like to play more, because Faruzan feels the same to play in both teams. Perhaps her energy economy is better in Xiao teams thanks to Xianyun, but that's about it. I'll briefly mention Hazo Hypercarry, because while it's definitely not going to be as popular as the other 2 Anemo lads, this is still a viable use for your Faruzan. As you'd expect, she makes his Anemo numbers go up to a point above the amount that the devs probably ever intended for this guy. You'd be surprised at how decent the damage here is with a bit of investment. It's definitely got nothing on Ga Ming teams, not even close, but it's still a fun 4-star Hypercarry option. But let's be real, none of you have Hazo anyways, because he's in Genshin Banner jail. She's incredibly straightforward to use in every single team that you slot her into. Her field time is essentially next to 0, which is super useful for characters like Xiao who have a super long field time, which we're very greedy about. The only real playstyle issue of Faruzan is that her ER requirements are ridiculous, especially if you don't have a good chunk of her Constellations collected. However, since you'll tend to be playing her with a Fav bow and an Anemo DPS team, aka there will always be a second Anemo present, you should end up being fine in terms of ER. C0 requirements are still pretty rough though. While she is indeed an absolutely amazing 4-star for all of these characters, she is infamously known for being one of the most Constellation-hungry 4-star characters in the entire game. It's kind of ridiculous how much better she feels with them. The only other 4-star buffer that feels this con-locked is Kujo Sara. Let's have a look at her cons individually to see why they're so good for her exactly. Her C1 isn't where the kicker is, unfortunately. Unless you're playing DPS Faruzan, this is really not going to mean anything to you. Now we're talking. A 6-second increase to your largest source of buffing is nothing short of utterly bonkers. As I already said earlier, she buffs hypercarry characters. You know what those tend to have? Long field times. So more duration on this is really appreciated for the sake of keeping up with something like Xiao's super long burst duration. You also get more value for your ER if that makes sense. Sure, you have to build a ton on her to cast for burst in the first place, but when you do, it'll cover you for your entire rotation. An upgrade to her skill doesn't really matter. You're using it for particle generation, not for its damage or scalings. Plus, the minor grouping it offers has nothing to do with the talent scalings. Pretty useless as far as Constellations go in my opinion. I would have put her burst upgrade down here. This C4 is an incredible game changer for Faruzan. Her ER needs are genuinely so absurd pre-C4, so additional energy generation sources are 100% more than welcome. ER stonks for sure. Finally, here's the +3 to her ult. You'll get a pretty neato extra amount of buffing from it now, very cool. Yet nothing can compare to what is to come next. It's called the Wondrous Path of Truth for a reason, because this unlocks the true potential of Anemo hypercarries. 40% extra Anemo crit damage. The enemies are cooked, guys. Pack up and go home. It's a massive boost to Anemo DPSs. What more is there to say? I will add that it's quite nice that she buffs damage over rate, because Xiao has quite an inherently large amount of crit rate, so there's a clear synergy going on here. While you should still be using C0 Faruzan with your Xiao or Scara, I cannot deny the wild increase that her Constellations offer to how she feels to play. I really wouldn't blame anyone for not wanting to build up a C0 to 1 Faruzan, because it does feel a lot worse than one with C4+. The silver lining here is that both Wanderer and Xianyun, characters who you may end up pulling for if you care about using Faruzan, tend to have her on their banners, so you'll most likely collect some copies over time. It also helps that those two have nice constellations themselves, opening up another opportunity for you to max out your Faruzan. With that being said, I think it's really dumb that they don't put her on Xiao's banners. Even if she was designed for Scara specifically, she's still the Lamenter's best in slot support. I don't know what Hoyo's cooking there. Anyways, does she need Constellations? No, she'll be best in slot for these guys even down at C0, but it'd be disingenuous of me to pretend like her higher cons don't seriously improve how she feels to play. Her meta history is very straightforward. Scaramouche was coming out soon, and Xiao was a pretty mid-tier carry that was sort of falling off compared to other units at the time. To any newer players, yes, there was genuinely a time where Xiao was considered to be mid, which is sorta hard to believe nowadays. Faruzan came along and totally switched things up. The Lamenter went from being mid to being an absolutely incredible DPS option if you were willing to pour in the heavy investment that he demands, and Scara has always had her, so there's not much to say other than, wow, he really likes to use this character in his best teams, huh? It is quite literally as simple as that. One interesting thing to note is that Sumeru 4 stars had been pretty awful for the most part, and while a lot of them have found their feet nowadays, back then they kinda stunk. Faruzan was one of the first genuinely meta 4-star characters in a super long time, but unfortunately that did come at the cost of her being incredibly Constellation hungry. She also had nothing to do with a Dendro meta that was thriving at the time, which was nice for all of us Dendro avoiders. She continued to dominate as the best second slot-in for any Anemo hypercarry team all throughout Fontaine. Xiao's teams did indeed receive upgrades via Farina and Xianyun, and Scara also really liked having Farina around, which helped further his C4 Jean synergy, because now you could also use Jean for her Anemo Red Shred, yet even as she got all of those upgrades, Faruzan still remained as the main premier Anemo hypercarry support. Cut to current day, and we're in the Natlan era running up to version 5.2. Literally nothing has changed. She remains as being the queen of all things Anemo DPS related. Well, Venti is a true Anemo queen, but you know what I mean. Nobody else is able to do what she does to her level of efficiency. I would genuinely be terrified of how monstrous both Xiao and Scaramouche would become if they were given a support which had an upgraded 5-star version of her kit. Those two are both still good, strong DPSs even now, especially Xiao. She's lasted for so long at this stage that I have a hard time believing that she'll ever fall off dramatically, unless they quite literally replace her as a character, which I doubt Hoyo would do considering how she's quite niche. She's gonna remain as the best in slot Anemo DPS support. I believe that her meta standing is very solid. Nobody needs a Faruzan on their account per se, she caters to a very specific niche. However, she thrives absolutely beautifully in said niche. I will say that it's pretty annoying how exclusive she is. They seriously need to run her on more banners, especially considering how many fans both the Anemo DPS lads have. Plus, because she feels really rough to play pre-C4, with a massive team damage boost being locked behind her C6, she ends up feeling like a super expensive unit. In turn, both Xiao and Scaramouche feel like expensive units because of how much they want this woman on their side. Is it a worthwhile price if you want to boost your Anemo lads? Assuming that you're not like me and you don't have to pull 7 5-star characters to get your C0 Faruzan up to C6, then yes, it's worth the heavy amount of primos that you've got to invest. My personal advice is to wait for a Xianyun banner, and then keep going for Farukons up until C2. Beyond that, Xianyun's constellations sorta start to fall off. Waiting for the bird means that you get another high con support out of this in the process, which is more valuable to your account on the whole, especially considering that Xianyun only really works with good units, or enables certain units to be really strong. It's a shame that any conversation about Faruzan sadly can't be separated from her constellation lineup. It's such an integral part to her kit which really upgrades the feel of the character. She is still completely worth using down at C0, and I cannot state that enough. You're still gonna get really solid mileage out of her. Alas, even so, I can't ignore such a glaring issue. I would say that Faruzan at C6 matches the quality of the modern day good 4-stars that we have, the likes of Gaming and Chevris, Genshin's and Miku 100% in their leagues. She does lack versatility in a sense since you're pretty much only ever going to use her with hypercarries that dish out Anemo damage, yet she makes up for that by being ridiculously good at her special dedicated job. I'm not sure as to whether this is a hot take or not, but to both Xiao and Scara, Faruzan is essentially a 5-star support. She is Vishenha to the Ayaka, a character who enables a wild amount of potential in Anemo carries across the land. So even if she remains as an expensive niche character that only works in a couple of teams, boy does she work in those teams like nobody else. If you own the respective units that she works with and you use them often, then I think you can consider Faruzan to be one of the best 4-stars in the whole game. Niche supports always come with some sort of catch. That's just how it is at this stage. Chevris exiling all non-pyros or electros, Goros only for def units, Shenhe refuses to return home with the milk, you get the gist. Faruzan's catch is high cost, high reward. I'd say time has mostly offered her new teams that feature Xianyan, which means her ER requirements aren't as bad anymore. Otherwise, she's still the same mean, green, animal buffing machine that we all know and grimace at because she's never on banners. But what do you think about Faruzan? Do you still think that she's a highly competitive 4-star in this day and age? Or is she too niche or expensive for your personal tastes? Let me know down below in the comments. I would definitely love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video is able to update you on Faruzan's current position in the Genshin Impact meta. This has been Juice, signing out, and we still need 2 more teammates to complete Mono Miku. Come on, who's it gonna be?